Today we're talking about Smartboards, great tool or waste of money. You're listening to the Teacher Tech Podcast. Let's get started. All right, greetings and welcome to episode 3 of the Teacher Tech Podcast. I am Daniel Kelly, and thanks for tuning in to today's episode on Smartboards. The Teacher Tech Podcast and show notes can be found at danielkelly.co/teachertech. Check out the website and feel free to add Teacher Tech Podcast to your favorite RSS feed or on iTunes. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook at DanielKellyEDU. So I wanted to talk about Smartboards, or what's more generically called interactive whiteboards. Smartboards is a specific company that kind of cornered the market for a little while, but there are plenty of other options other than the Smartboards brand. I started originally on a Promethean board. You had to move it around the classroom, and it worked with a projector, and you had to calibrate it every time you tried to use it. Then I upgraded to an actual Smartboard, and eventually I think I finished out with an Epson board that used a pen instead of the touch screen that the Smartboards currently have. I said on the outro of the last episode that I'm not a fan of Smartboards, and there's a few reasons why, and really I want to go back to kind of the beginnings of this guide on the side movement. Back in, I believe it was 1993, there was an article published by Allison King that said that we needed to move from being the sage on the stage to the guide on the side, and that's where that now cliche comes from. And when I first started teaching, I worked at a school that was trying to implement project-based curriculum. And the first year, they made a big deal about having LCD projectors installed in each room. We spent school-wide probably $150,000, $160,000 to get these purchased and installed. And they're a useful technology. I grew up in the overhead projector world with the old reel-to-reel video projectors, and I also remember the click slide projectors where a student would have to sit there and click, and you would go through as the teacher lectured these notes, and that was big technology back then. And I remember one of my favorite times in school was when they rolled the AV cart into the front of the room, and you were all excited because you got to watch TV instead of listening to somebody talk for the period. But when I was teaching at this first school, they made this big deal about the projectors, and I think they're great. But the following year, they installed Epson interactive whiteboards for every classroom in the building. And where they put them kind of got me interested in instructional technology as a whole, especially in, are we using our money effectively? So we used, back then it was race to the top money, and we said, well, we're going to use this money and we're going to put these 21st century tools in every classroom. So they put these Smartboards right where the screens for the projectors went. And if you turned on the projector, it would show on the whiteboard, but it would be cast a shadow from the projector for the Smartboard, or the interactive whiteboard. And what we did was we just replaced a functional, somewhat cost-effective technology with a $2,000 projector. They required a pen, and they required being hooked up to a computer and special software, and you had to know what you were doing. And the training was more, here's a Smartboard, it's 21st century technology, the kids are going to love it, use it. Well, if I go back to that sage on the stage, guide on the side cliche, the administration and the school and the district itself was really pushing that we should, be facilitating learning and walking around the classroom, not standing at the board writing on it. And then they put a new technology in the class that literally locked you to the front of the room. So I'm not a huge fan of the technology from a teaching perspective. From a technology perspective, some of them are kind of cool. You have the Smartboards with the actual, that it has some sort of touch technology. The newest ones, they just add onto a TV and they're capacitive touch. So it is neat in that you can save the notes, and if you have an absent student, you can send the notes to them, or however you teach on those screens. And I've tried that where I've recorded what I've written on the board and saved it, and all I really have is a folder full of saved screenshots, essentially, of what I wrote on the Smartboard that doesn't really do anything. It just sits in a folder. So I said, well, why don't we just use, and at that time, Apple TV had just really kind of come into the market and had the ability to share your actual iPad screen onto a television or a projector or anything that had HDMI. I said, why don't we use that, and we can carry that iPad around the room and just have this $100 box that will literally connect to anything. And we can use that. And the response I got was, well, we put all these Smartboards in, we have to use them. So a few years after this happened, I took a position at a more affluent charter school. And they were a little bit more forward-thinking. They were instituting a one-to-one initiative in their high school. And they had that same idea that I had. Let's use the Apple TV and an iPad. So every teacher was given an Apple TV and an iPad, and in most cases a larger 70-inch LCD television, which works great in any classroom. The color works. There's you don't have the light issues that you have with a projector. So I was all excited when I heard this, and I walked into my classroom, and right at the front of the board, or front of the room rather, was a Smartboard. So I didn't have the Apple TV. They did give me one to connect to it, but again, using a $2,000-$3,000 interactive whiteboard as a projector. Eventually, another teacher really wanted to use the Smartboard. We were able to swap out the equipment, and I got my television with the Apple TV, which is what I wanted. And so for a few $100s, and those televisions are dirt cheap, for a few $100s, I got the iPod and the Apple TV, and I'm able to project what I have on the iPad and go around the room. And the students can interact with it. They can use it. You can annotate with certain apps. And I'll have another podcast later on about the apps you can use for this. But you can truly facilitate in that respect. You can walk around the room. You can manage behavior. You can manage time on task. You can do all of those things that you're supposed to be doing while walking around the room and not locked to the front of the screen. But you can still write all that information if you're good with a pen on the iPad. And I've seen some teachers that are phenomenal with it. You can save that information. The students can then see it afterwards. And you don't have this technology that's locking you to the front of the room. Have I seen them used for good? Yes and no. So one of my favorite times I used it, and it was not a situation that I would normally say this is great teaching, but we were doing an interactive STEM unit. As much as I don't like the word STEM, we were doing this interactive STEM unit, and we were showing the force and velocity and angle, and we were using Angry Birds to do this. Now, this is a middle school, probably 7th grade classroom. And a colleague of mine and myself were using Angry Birds to teach this kind of these ideas. And at the time, I was really into using games in instruction and trying to find ways to use these games that the kids liked, that they would really be engaged. So we took this interactive, the actual Smartboard where you could touch it, and the kids would go up and they would pull the bird back and they would shoot it at the pigs, if you're familiar with Angry Birds. And the principal walked in. And it it was my first or second year of teaching, and I'm like, oh great. And she had this notepad, which everybody knew was the official, you're being evaluated now. And it turned out it was me, and it was a surprise evaluation. We got a couple a year in the district that I was in. And here she is writing down. Children are yelling at the board because they're excited, and they're playing Angry Birds. And I thought that I was done. It turns out she loved the lesson, and maybe it was a good lesson, maybe it wasn't. But the bottom line is that's the most effective use of a smartboard that I've ever seen. A good friend of mine, he teaches high school. He uses it for review games. He has essentially what looks to me to be like a skee ball, like the target area. So there's these different areas that are worth different values, and they throw this spongy ball at it that somehow triggers the smartboard to sense that it was touched, and they'll throw it lightly at the board, and whatever point value it hits, that's the difficulty of the question it gets. And the students really enjoy it. It's really engaging. They get to review. They're up out of their seats, and they're trying to beat everybody, and it's a competitive review session. But again, 2 uses of the smartboard that I've seen that are at least somewhat effective in teaching. And for the amount of money that I've seen spent on these things, those 2 lessons do not show a return on investment that's worth the amount of money that is being spent on them. But they're a cool technology, and we think that that's a great idea. And this happens throughout education. If you look at educational technology companies and you go to these shows that always have the vendor fair, because that's how they fund these conferences, and you look around at some of the technologies that just they're not useful, and they're incredibly expensive. They look cool, they're novel, but they don't show me, at least, how we can use this in the classroom to enhance learning and be worth the money we're spending on it. A great example of this is I was involved because of my passion, and I guess I was a technology teacher, which to everybody in most public schools thinks, well, you're the computer guy. So I got asked to go to a training on a 3D projector that the district was buying. They were buying 3 of them for a cost of $100,000. So I went to this training so I could teach the other teachers how to use these in the classroom. And I went to the training, and it was me, and it was a room full of probably 30 teachers, all experienced. And this former superintendent, former principal, former classroom teacher who had retired and now worked for this 3D projector company, told us how, this is a great technology. The kids love it. He pitched it. And I thought it was cool. And I said, oh, this is really neat. Can we go in there? And I'm thinking virtual or augmented reality, where they can go in and look at a cell and zoom into the internal parts of a cell and look at the mitochondria and see how a cell is put together, and zoom out and turn it. And some kind of, like I said, augmented reality or virtual reality. But really, it was just a 3D image of whatever cell it was, or you could look at a mountain in 3D, or an undersea scape in 3D. And it was just a 3D projector, something that now you can buy for your house to watch, movies. I mean, most movies coming out now have a 3D component to it. And these were over $30,000 a piece. And I thought it was a waste of money until he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's a near quote, the 3D technology engages a different part of the child's brain, and they're able to focus on it more. At that point, I called BS. And this is not engaging a different part of their brain. They're engaged because it's 3D and it's novel and it's cool, but it does not engage another part of their brain. So we brought that back to the school. It sat in a closet. It was used 3 times that year, twice by me. And I used it just to play around and see what you could get out of it. And as I dug deeper into it, it had these kind of demo out of the box lessons that that were okay. And they weren't lessons, I should clarify. They were just videos. There was no alignment to any kind of standard. There was no, teacher talk and student activity. There was none of that. It wasn't a lesson plan. It was just these videos. And to get the videos that were much more interactive, that had a lot more detail, you had to pay thousands of dollars to get these things. And I'm pretty tech savvy, and I could not find them like on Google. And just to try them out, you had to purchase them. And for me, it's just an example, and I want to get back to the Smartboards, but this is just an example of how we bring in these technologies that don't really do anything to enhance student learning, that they make the administration feel good because they brought in these new tools that will engage the students. And I've said it before, and I'll continue to say it, that engagement, i.e. fun for the students, does not mean that they're learning. It does not mean that they're engaged with the material. They may be engaged with the technology, but the material is secondary to the novelty aspect of that technology. So back to the Smartboards, we have this technology that is kind of cool. You can write, and then you turn it off, and it's gone. And I don't know if that makes it a multi-$1,000 eraser or what it does, but I don't see how these interactive whiteboards are the greatest technology to come to a classroom. And this argument has been made before. When the overhead projector, and there's literature on this, and it's fascinating to read. When the overhead projector came about and they started putting it in classrooms, people were afraid that the overhead projector would replace the teacher because the teacher no longer had to interact with the material. They could pre-write it, and they could put it on this overhead projector, and the students could take notes. So the teacher was no longer writing on the chalkboard, and the students were taking notes, and you get that didactic, instructional method where the teacher's just talking at the students, and the students write it down. Now you could have anybody do it because now you have this just transparency that goes on the overhead projector, and the students take notes. And as that moved forward, and the argument has been moving towards in digital learning, that replacement of the teacher, making these teacher-proof technologies so that we can use the technology to teach the student. And what's shown over and over and over again is the teacher is a fundamental component of learning, of actual knowledge acquisition by the students. So we have these technologies that we use, like the interactive whiteboards or smartboards, that look cool on paper. They look cool at the front of the room. They're neat the first time you try it, but they don't really have that return on investment, that in not just money, but in the time it takes to set it up, the maintenance it takes to keep it going. The bulbs on it are several hundreds of dollars. I think 6 or 7 for the actual smartboard bulbs. Some of the other ones are a little bit cheaper, but they're costly. We have to have them connected to another device, and there has to be software installed and drivers installed, and they have to be calibrated. And there's a significant amount of work that has to be done for the teachers to be able to use that technology in everyday instruction. And that's not to say that some teachers don't do a good job. I've seen examples of it, but for the most part, and certainly in my experience, when these were literally in every single classroom and one teacher is using it other than a replacement for for a whiteboard having this interactive capability. But it does lock the teacher to the front of the room. And I think that in a modern teaching scenario, in what's being taught in teacher preparation, in what we're finding the value of the teacher being present around the room for all the students rather than just being at the front and talking at them, I think that the Smartboard, I don't think it has the return on investment we need in teacher time, in teacher training, in money, and that money can be used in other ways. I want to clarify that this is one man's opinion. I'd like to hear your opinion on Smartboards. I'd like to hear how you're using them. in ways that are innovative, that are novel, that are new, and show me and show other people out there, other teachers, how these boards can be used in the classroom to enhance instruction, to augment instruction in meaningful ways. But I want to know what you think. I want to know what teachers out there are using. Are they using the Smartboards in a way that really enhances student learning? Are they using the 3D projectors? I'd love to hear your stories using those in a cool and meaningful way that really it makes students think and gets them to see things in a different way. Leave your feedback at Daniel Kelly EDU on Twitter, Daniel Kelly EDU on Facebook. Check out the website, danielkelly.co/teachertech. Use the hashtag teachertech, and we'll get a conversation going on Twitter. I'd love to hear what you want to hear going forward, and tell me what you want me to talk about, any technologies to review, any topics to cover. I'd love to get that feedback and make the show a little bit more interactive. And that's it for the Teacher Tech Podcast, Episode 3. I'd like to thank you guys for listening. I hope you follow us on Twitter, friend us on Facebook at Daniel Kelly EDU, and let me know what you want to hear about going forward. I'd love to make this more interactive and hear from teachers on the ground what they're using. And if you disagree with what I'm saying, I want to hear about it. I want to discuss it and get to know why I might be wrong. Thank you for listening to the Teacher Tech Podcast.